Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final episode of Scenestalking, the podcast where we discuss the ongoing impacts of screen tourism in and around the UK. Throughout this series, we've explored how screen tourism shapes iconic filming locations across the UK, from Wells, aka Sandford in Somerset, to Bampton in Oxfordshire and Highclere Castle in Hampshire, the fictional home of the Crawley family who reside in Downton Abbey, home of Paddington Bear at 30 Chalcot Crescent in London, and the industrial Black Country Living Museum in the West Midlands. In this final episode, we're stepping back to look at the bigger picture, how screen tourism fits into national strategy, policy, and the future of the UK tourism industry. Well, today, folks, I'm joined by two guests, Dame Judith McGregor, who has extensive experience in international diplomacy and tourism leadership as an ex-member of the Screen Tourism Council, and Martin Evans, founder of the SetJet 25, the World Screen Tourism Summit. Dame Judith and Mr. Evans, it's an honour. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah.
Yes, hi. Hi, Bruno.
Firstly, Dame Judith, from a national policy perspective, how significant is screen tourism within the UK's overall tourism strategy? Has its importance grown in recent years?
I mean, the answer is yes, 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 yes. I mean, really, to all of those. I think what's been kind of new in the last probably couple of years has been sort of the national policy to sort of to play back that interest, to increase more tourists to come to all parts of Britain. So while our paperwork and our photographic work and our sort of stuff overseas, when I was ambassador, for example, promoting tourism, very much drew on sort of the attributes that were in films, we didn't necessarily badge them always with films, although actually in some ways we did. We used to sort of obviously try and sort of promote British films, but consciously over about the last couple of years, when I was still on the British Tourist Authority board, we were very much trying to, as it were, capture the impact by playing back more actively the images from those films and associating them directly with the parts of Britain from where they came. Because it wasn't always, of course, labelled in the films, but by sort of saying, and that was filmed in Yorkshire, or that was filmed in Wales, or that was filmed in somewhere else. That's then sort of says, so come and see it for yourself. So it's playing around with something that's been in existence for a while, but making it a more active policy.
Yeah, interesting. And it's good that they're giving it more focus time now, especially as screen tourism and travelling in general is becoming much more popular, I suppose. Martin, I want to talk SetJet 25. Welcome to the show. So screen tourism is often framed as a win for local economies, but based on data shared at SetJet 25, what does the evidence actually show about long-term economic impacts rather than short-term visitor spikes?
So this answer is possibly applicable to quite a few of the questions, but in my experience, it's completely dependent on the actual incident. So the film or the television series and the destination itself. Like you've already said, some destinations are very, very strong anyway, and this is icing on the cake, and it might be short-term icing on the cake. Other destinations are in the sort of fourth division of tourism destinations, and it propels them into at least the third division. The classic case up in this area, and I'm in York, is Heartbeat, the television series, which had 17 series.
So nostalgic.
And was a Sunday evening primetime favourite. And that catapulted the village of Goathland in the North York Moors from 200,000 visitors per annum to 1.6 million.
Blimey.
And that will never go back. It will never return to its previous level. And it will probably continue to grow over time as the series is repeated and is on across the world. So, it very much depends on the incident of whether TV and film and whether it works or not and becomes popular and actually showcases the destination well and makes that connection, but also the destination and where it's been in the sort of tourism ladder.
Exactly. In a way, almost symbiotic relationship between the destination and the production itself. Get a film filmed there, TV series, and it does really well. It performs really well. And I suppose that eventually becomes screen tourism hotspot. So, Judith, coming back to policy then, does the government actively plan for screen tourism, or would you say it's still largely treated as a byproduct of successful film and television productions?
Well, they're not trying to fund films in order to promote tourism, I suppose you could say. I mean, sort of, that there's another industry there. But I think sort of the government certainly is very aware and very supportive of the use, and sometimes obviously in making our sort of tourism films about drawing on screen parts of the sort of the film, or I don't think there were any interviews with any of the actors involved, but we had to get the rights from all the different studios and cinema in order to be able to use either a picture or an allusion or a reference to a picture, and that obviously cost us money. So the government was willing to put money towards that.
Well, I suppose it's reassuring to see that there's some investment in screen tourism from the government.
Yes.
These destinations then in general, Martin, I'm going to send you this one. How do they determine whether screen tourism driven by a major production becomes sustainable rather than just a temporary surge tied to hype? How do they measure this?
I don't think many do measure it. I think generally, I've spent 30 plus years in marketing, and market research is often the forgotten part of marketing. And statistics tell different stories depending on how you interpret them and how you collect them in the first place. So I don't think, and then the cyclical nature of funding of regional tourism organisations and local authorities mean that even if they wish to research it over that effect over 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years, they probably wouldn't. And people, change jobs and things get left behind. So I don't think there's really many destinations that sustainably measure the sustainability. They will measure visitor impact or the impact on the number of visitors, but even that can be very unscientific for a couple of reasons. One is that, well, the main reason is they don't ask the right questions necessarily. You will have seen press releases put out by Visit Britain saying 9 out of 10 people who come to Britain are interested in going to a film or TV location. Fine. There'll be others that say 30% are motivated by, and there'll be other terms that are used as and create different percentages. So I'm not happy with the level of research that is done into this, this effect of screen tourism. And I think that for those reasons, it's hard to actually measure the additionality of a screen, of a campaign, for example, like that.
Interesting. It sounds like the research is certainly inadequate, maybe not even focused on enough from our government. It's not a priority for them. Dame Judith, you were part of the British Tourism Authority, so I just want to know, how do they collaborate with the film and television industry to sort of maximise the economic returns from these major productions?
Well, as I say, I mean, the British Tourist Authority, obviously, one of the things that it does through its overseas offices quite often. I mean, through its overseas offices, it will be distributing out any material that it makes, or any sort of pictures or images that are out there that may require buying or may not, maybe just free to air, obviously over the internet. And they will be taking those images, putting them together with a commentary. There was just something literally I saw yesterday about Yorkshire. Yorkshire had put out a sort of quite a long piece about how many different parts of serials and films and television that you didn't necessarily know. They were in the background or they were the foreground, but they weren't itemized, obviously, because they were being used as backdrops, were actually in Yorkshire. It's a very large number. And so, sort of that kind of, and we will have encouraged them, we'll have encouraged different tourism bodies around the UK, local tourism bodies, to precisely do that, to sort of look at a wide range of places and to sort of see whether they can sort of identify a film where that's been used, and then they can say that and play that back to tourists coming there. It's a very bouncy sort of business, I mean, you sort of, one thing comes up, you play that, and then it plays back. But I mean, I'm just trying to think if I've got any figures for you. But I mean, basically, sort of our tourism has been growing quite well this year, I gather.
Yeah.
Sort of basically, we're trying to reach a target of 50 million international visitors by 2030. And
Wow.
the spend of tours because it isn't so much the volume of tourism that one's interested in, it's the value of tourism and the spend in different regions. And spend this year is expected to be up 7% on last year. You know, and inflation is running fairly constantly still, quite reasonably low, so there will be quite a net effect of that. But still, also, numbers of people are going up. 45 million expected this year.
That's an increase.
So, you know, sort of basically, the aim is to get more and more spend and more diversity in location. And I found some statistic, Bruno, you may already have, but Visit Britain's research shows that more than 9 out of 10 potential visitors to the UK say they're keen to visit filming location and places seen on screen. And that research also showed that 1 in 6 people who had previously visited the UK said they were influenced by film and TV locations to travel outside of London. And that's on something called Screen Tourism on the Visit Britain site. So, you know, there clearly is a sort of an interest in doing that. And that's why obviously Visit Britain's been producing these various Screen Britain sort of films. Starring Great Britain was the sort of the major one, which was shown all over the place. And then, of course, that gets relayed and it gets put on billboards and it gets sort of, you know, people tweet it and not tweet it these days, but whatever they do, Instagram it or they send it to all the other friends. So basically, you know, sort of, we reckon that Starring Great Britain campaign has generated an estimated 217 million in additional spending by international visitors from its launch in January 2025. It was launched January to June 2025.
Wow, that's insane, isn't it?
That's a sort of certain amount of kind of granularity there in terms of some of the figures and some of the net benefit. One of the things about tourism, of course, is it's always broken down into different places. So the West Midlands Growth Company, you know, have published statistics about Peaky Blinders. The Scottish Expedia, I see, is extraordinary, really. You know, about the Scottish Visitor Survey have seen that a particular castle in the Outlander series, you know, got a whole lot more people who have been to see it. And people sort of, you know, you can sort of chart digitally people's reactions to when they've seen things to the places they then inquire about. Whether, of course, they go there, it still then remains to be seen.
That is absolutely incredible, actually. Just the data published mainly by Visit Britain, which I have seen a PDF of their most recent findings. I think it's 2025. It just shows actually the scale of screen tourism, how important, how much of a generator it is to the whole of the UK. It's amazing. So, Martin, my next question is for you then. Is there a risk, economic dependency then, is there a risk that some regions in the UK become economically dependent on a single franchise or production? And have you seen examples where that reliance has created vulnerability at times?
Hardly ever a region. A region is a big, you know, for me, there's continents, then there's countries, and then there's regions. And region is usually, well, we used to have regional tourist boards in England and there were only 11. So that shows you the size of a region. I worked at Yorkshire Tourist Board and it was 5 million residents of Yorkshire. So a region is never that dependent on the success of a film. After regions comes, in the pyramid structure, as far as I'm concerned, localized destinations. So it might be a city, or as I say, in the case of Gothland, it's a village, and it's the village surrounding area, maybe for 3 miles either around it. So I think once you get down to very small, much smaller destinations, yes. I think visitor attractions, you see, there's 2 main beneficiaries on the tourism product side of screen tourism. One is destinations and the other is visitor attractions. And there's some good examples of visitor attractions that, well, some are created specially for tourism, like for screen tourism, like the Game of Thrones attraction in Northern Ireland, and others are benefited, like the Black Country Living Museum right now because of Peaky Blinders. So I think that once you get down to the localized destination, the village, the town, and once you look at single attractions, then some of them do changed dramatically for the better.
Yeah,
But
that's interesting.
regions, no. Regions, London, Manchester, Yorkshire, no. There's nothing that perhaps makes more than 5% maximum difference to the a regional tourism value.
That's interesting. That's a lot smaller number than I thought, to be fair. Dame Judith, on the topic of regions, in your opinion, to what extent should these regions integrate screen tourism into their long-term economic planning rather than treating it, I suppose, as a short-term opportunity?
Well, I guess they can do both. I mean, obviously, they're going to try and sort of use it as a sort of a one-off now, as it were, as it comes up. But I'm sure, I think they definitely should. And then I was going to sort of bring in something else there too, Bruno, which is sort of, it may be you're talking about screen tourism and sort of obviously effectively what we're talking about at the moment is kind of it being in films, being in television series.
Yeah.
But I mean, obviously, once stuff through that perhaps gets out into sort of social media and there's material out there, then other people are going to use that in different ways. So, industries in a particular place, if they had that, might want to use it to burnish the image for whatever reason to sort of benefit there, or that they'll use it as part of their kind of backdrop. Because obviously business tourism is quite important. People do come over for conferences. So you could quite imagine somebody in, I don't know, post Wuthering Heights or something, sort of Emerald Fennels might be saying, yeah, why don't you come and have the conference, here, the medical conference in Harrogate or wherever, close to Bronte country, which was always popular, but because of the books, but now because of the film, and sort of show the film up. And I'm sure that they should be doing that because of the very considerable importance for people. For example, a lot of tourism in the Gulf in India when I was chair was people saying that they wanted to go to places where they could get the best picture, they could get the best image, they could get the best kind of a unique combination of images. And if that's an interest for them, then being alongside some quite well-known screen image is obviously important to them as well. So yes,
Okay.
I think they probably are, and they probably should. And I think it's also linked into, I don't know if your project extends also to things like, when I recently visited Bishop Auckland in Durham, and at Bishop Auckland, they have every year, or they had, they've now been redoing it, a sort of big kind of epic sonne lumiere involving thousands of actors and people from the locality to act out with lights and backdrops of video screens and so on, the history of Durham, or the history of people in that part, or the history of mining, or whatever it was.
All right. I think I've heard of that.
And
Yeah.
it's called, the particular one that I'm talking about is called Kinren,
Okay.
and KYNREN, and it's being rejigged now to come out again and basically tell more stories and more interesting things. And basically it's contributed, they reckon, since it started in 2016, almost £70 million to the sort of northeast economy. So there's kind of like screen in classic film and television, but there's also screen in terms of screen being used in tourism events, which are also, I think, of interest to people. And people just, know them. I mean, obviously, everybody knows about rock concerts and festivals and classical festivals as also being a driver for tourism. But sort of using imagery alongside pageant, I think, is something which is developing still. And I think that's something that all of these regional tourism bodies will be looking at and considering for the longer term.
It's an interesting commentary there, just how regional tourism boards kind of need to adapt, I suppose, to the changing, it is an ever-changing landscape. And I think screen tourism, certainly this study, exposes its flaws, I guess, where it needs to improve, where councils need to improve on. Very fascinating. Moving on then, Martin, I'm coming to you for this one. The main angle, really, of my project is asking the question, what if a major production was never filmed in a location? So my question to you is, if a major production had never been filmed in a particular location, What do you think realistically would be different today in terms of jobs, infrastructure, and business growth?
Same question, I think, or the same answer to an extent. There won't be that much impact on the high level sort of country or region. I think that therefore, if you look at the percentage difference in most cases, whether it's James Bond or Harry Potter or whatever, a region wouldn't be that much affected in terms of jobs or value of tourism, number of tourists. I think there are a few examples where I would say, yeah, I'd accept a different view. One is the effect of Lord of the Rings in New Zealand, where because it was such a successful franchise, and three films and came off the books and everything, I think it probably did change tourism for the long term in New Zealand by a few percentage points. Short term, it was probably up by double-digit percentages because of Lord of the Rings, and then it waned off. But I think it's probably kept that high, kept a higher level than it would have, and therefore created more jobs, sustained more jobs, created a big one of New Zealand's major tourist attractions, Hobbiton. So I think there are a few exceptions at the high level. At the lower level of villages and resorts, Cornish resorts that have featured on Doc Martin or Return to Paradise. I think, again, it might hit double digits and might settle down at sort of 5% increase and 5% more jobs in that village. There's some effect, but it's definitely, it's an interesting, it would be interesting to research it, but no one's doing that research.
It's a shame, really, because it's such an interesting topic. It's what I'm doing my major project on, essentially, in a nutshell. And, well, I hope this podcast and my project as a whole can be an advocator, I suppose, for a new study into how screen tourism is impacting local economies and what the economies would look like in the absence of screen tourism. So it's interesting. My next question then, Dame Judith, the concept of over-reliance. Do you think there's a risk of over-reliance on globally successful franchises when shaping tourism strategies, particularly in areas with fewer alternative economic drivers?
Well, there's always a risk in the sense that people get tired of things and therefore sort of what is now cutting edge becomes kind of, oh yeah, I've done that, seen that, don't particularly want to go and do that again. Um, Although things like the Game of Thrones in Northern Ireland still seems to sort of, I guess because there's always a new generation of people coming through all the time, or people who haven't travelled to a particular place. So it's a risk, but it's probably not to be sort of necessarily stopping you doing stuff, because you can always exploit these things in different and more imaginative ways. Yes, of course, if you're sadly, I don't know, let's say you're in Southeast London or something where no one's actually ever been to sort of film anything for anything, would you want tourism? Would you worry about it? Would you, I mean, obviously you've always got to work with what you've got. Screen tourism just gives you an opportunity to work with a lot more than you realise perhaps that you had, because a team, or it had been used in a film or a stage show or whatever that went on to be very, very, very popular. So I think there's a risk in putting your eggs in one basket in anything, and certainly in tourism, people are always seeking to both keep alive what is being successful while looking for newer and more attractive offers. You must have come across this, but the sort of big bugbear, obviously, of people organising tourism in a place like the UK is that it's terribly seasonal. People are very keen to go and visit from May to October, but maybe over Christmas and over Easter, but then they kind of basically don't. And yet those organisations and restaurants and hotels and events have got to survive those winter months.
Yeah, it's not easy
So,
for them.
I suppose they'll be using anything they can. And if screen tourism is something they can do from the inside, if it's a house or a place that people have seen on the outside and they can open and use it inside, or something like that, then they'll be very keen anyway to stretch that tourism season for longer. So there probably aren't so very many places that haven't got something to publicise themselves, but some may be luckier on the screen tourism than others. But I think sort of, it's not something that sort of should not be done because not everybody can benefit from it. And as I say, I think if you get imaginative about things, you can benefit from a very, very wide range of things.
I agree. Imagination is at the centre, it's at the heart of screen tourism. It is literally the driver of screen tourism, I suppose. Imagining yourself in a certain location or place. And I think the people that are based in these locations need to do that as much as the fans that visit them do, in a way. I don't know how they would achieve that, but it's certainly something to strive towards, I suppose. Perhaps a good business model to ensure the survival of screen tourism. So, Martin, as the organizer of the SetJet 25, how do you distinguish between correlation and causation? In other words, how do we know a boom, an economic boom, cultural boom from screen tourism wasn't going to happen anyway?
So at the high level of sort of UK research, Visit Britain have something called the ONS survey, Office for National Statistics, and they will manage to get a question in to that, surveying people leaving the country, which is related to screen tourism. And so, you're able to come up with a figure of X% say they visited a screen tourism attraction, for example. I think that most research is not very well done and it's not very well funded, and therefore, and there's another thing in a minute which I'll tell you about, but I think causation, and correlating the TV program or the film to a figure of increased tourists is a very dangerous thing. And very few destinations either create the funds or have the funds to strip out all the other factors that may have contributed to it. Where you've got a tourist attraction that is specifically like Game of Thrones attraction, or World of Harry Potter in Watford, then yes, you've got 200,000, let's say, extra visitors specifically because of that. But they might displace another attraction in the area that could have been busy. I think the other point, Bruno, is that massaging of figures takes place partly for PR purposes, and you'll appreciate this as a budding journalist. So let's do a survey, but let's press release the things that make us look the best. So I'm not happy about the veracity of some statistics and some research for that reason also.
What kind? Go on.
It's
sorry.
It's like Peaky Blinders at the moment. Peaky Blinders, just the film was premiered last night or the night before. Birmingham is sticking a lot on Peaky Blinders, but the actual increase in visitors to the West Midlands is, if it's 1% because of Peaky Blinders, it's brilliant. I mean, 1% is still thousands of people, don't get me wrong, but it's not huge as a complete, but they'll make a lot of it. And some things, maybe it's, again, your journalism side of things, positivity breeds positivity. Maybe sending out that positive message just has a very sustainable, beneficial effect for the long term.
Absolutely, positivity breeds positivity. I think a lot of places now just need to remember that optimism is key. You can show up on the day. In order to make a real difference, you got to show up all the time. You got to be there. You got to make a real impact, 100%. Tourism boards that are promoting screen tourism need to know this. This needs to be part of their agenda. Dame Judith, then, in terms of the distribution of screen tourism, the distribution of the economic benefits of screen tourism, as an ex-member of the Screen Tourism Council, how do you ensure the economic benefits of screen tourism are distributed beyond major cities and reach rural or less visited regions?
Well,
Plenty of filming locations are based outside of a city, or not many people are residents, not many people are living there. So how do you ensure these economic benefits are distributed beyond more populated areas?
again, that's been a sort of a major tenet, a major part of sort of tourism policy, under successive governments now, really. And one of the big sort of changes that came about in time when I was on the British Tourist Authority was that we had a big review of local tourism branches, sort of countrywide, and decided instead of sort of 2,000, sort of one man and a donkey sort of thing, we would try and sort of have just a certain smaller number of destination management organizations. Lots and lots of acronyms here, but anyway, but organizations who worked very, very closely with neighbouring partners in order that it didn't all go into one place or it didn't sort of stretch out to be more regional. And I think the current government has it in mind, if it hasn't done it already, to make sure that resource that could go for tourism should very much go to mayors in regional areas who, are charged with ensuring that it isn't just one part of their region that gets facilities, infrastructure, transport. And it's worth just saying in parenthesis that if you don't get your infrastructure and your transport in particular worked out, no one's going to visit these places anyway at any time under any kind of situation. So,
absolutely.
It's part and parcel of regional development that access is given to these things as well. And I think, people are very, very minded that communities will not be responsive to tourists coming if the benefits don't reach them.
Yes.
So, and that's another theme of over-tourism and sort of worries about everybody charging in to one place at one time, making it unbearable for the residents who may not see any economic benefit or much economic benefit from it. So trying to ensure a balanced and broadly equitable within the market constraints, obviously, that we're one's operating with, and certainly when it comes to infrastructure and transport, a strategy to ensure that the benefits are distributed. Yeah, that's very important part of tourism thinking.
Absolutely. The challenges, I suppose, surrounding the accessibility of these screen tourist hotspots. Transport is essential. Transport is the cornerstone, I suppose, of that concept. And that brings fresh challenges. I've been to Highclere and Bampton recently, where I was speaking to the church warden there, and he's said that the coaches that bring the screen tourists for the day have caused an obstruction and quite a nuisance to the local residents of the village of Bampton. So, in a way, yes, transport is extremely important.
Yeah, tourism can't just happen in a way that's going to kind of make the place unbearable for the people who live there, or bring no benefits at all, or just be a negative thing, because actually it will then stop. And a lot of people do depend on, in some parts of the country, Cornwall, for example. It's got other industries, but it very much depends on having a thriving tourism industry that does not make life unbearable, that does bring it sort of wider benefits. I wouldn't say it's been achieved, but it's certainly work in progress, and it's certainly the intention.
I agree. The transport sector is extremely important to support screen tourism beyond the urban areas, beyond the cities, beyond the populated hotspots, destinations. But with it brings a new set of challenges such as congestion, nuisance, and a range of different problems for the residents living there. And these all need to be taken into consideration by a tourism board or by the government, by the Department for CMS. I feel like it's not as much of a priority as it needs to be. Martin, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, there's two types of people in the community. There's the businesses that make up the visitor economy, and then there's the community residents. And I don't think many screen tourism much screen tourism benefits the residents. And in fact, we are now seeing the word over tourism applied to screen tourism, specifically in set jetting, to a point where it's actually a very negative effect on some residents, on the residents of some destinations. In terms of the visitor economy, I think the ultimate positive example is where someone has created a an attraction, which is a paid for visitor attraction, directly on the back of the film or TV franchise. You've also got, some licensing of TV film brands in theme parks, for example. So the theme park might become more popular because of that particular Harry Potter ride or whatever. But I live in York, and I'm sure the economy has benefited from a Channel 4 program called Patience recently, which has been on for 2 series now, and showcases York better than any other recent TV production. But the trickle down is, it is literally a trickle. It doesn't benefit the city more than perhaps 0.25% of its overall tourism value. So, there's a bit more money being spent in the obvious places, which is hotels, Airbnbs, bed and breakfasts.
Yeah.
And then, you've got the other attractions that will benefit because people are in York more because of that TV series. But then the other benefit is to shops and restaurants and cafes. So, yeah, there's an overall benefit. I think the other benefit that must be never lost sight of, which is not screen tourism, is the benefit of having the filming in the place in the first place. So, one hotel might get the crew,
Yes,
another hotel
interesting.
might get the stars. And this is all beneficial, but it's more screen industry related than screen tourism related.
Yeah, industry and tourism, in terms of screen, there is definitely a distinction to be made, 100%. I suppose it's about how can the two work in tandem, analysing this. If there is such analysis on it at the moment, there needs to be. One of the ways which I suppose that could happen is through policy. And Judith, I'm going to come back to you for this one. What policies are in place to manage the pressures that screen tourism can bring, such as we mentioned before, overcrowding, rising costs, or the strain on infrastructure, other infrastructure like hotels and B&Bs, like Martin was just talking about?
There are policies that people bring into play. Many of them are sort of still working their way through, so tourism taxes, which essentially are geared to handle the impacts that tourism can bring. That's something that's been, I think, introduced in Scotland. I think it's, one of those things that people argue over quite a bit because obviously the UK is regarded, with reason, for being a very expensive tourist destination. Hotels, restaurants, transport cost a lot more in the UK than in other parts of Europe, for example. So people with tight budgets are going to say, well, I want to go there, but actually I think it's rather expensive. I'm not going to go there this year. I'll wait and see how the economic situation pans out. Not helpful for the tourism industry.
No, exactly.
And when there's economic uncertainty, likewise. So policies to increase taxes or to increase charges or to basically, sort of make people think a little bit more carefully before they visit somewhere can be counterproductive to the overall wish of getting people to go to unusual places off the beaten track. So that's one policy you can take into place, but it's more difficult. I think the other policies are ones that aren't just particularly for screen tourism. They're sort of, they're for all times round, as it were, for all kinds of tourism. It's, event tourism or caravanning or camping or whatever the tourism you're talking about. It's basically trying to persuade people by virtue of showing that there is opportunity either side of a season, that not everybody needs to go in the first week of August, and perhaps it might be beneficial not to because of the sort of the opportunity that still exists. So scheduling events in such a way that they're not all happening in the same week of the year everywhere, but all over the place, that kind of thing is something people pay attention to try and get a sort of an all British Isles offer, if you like, that you could spend much longer because you can go around to these different places. I think sort of price, obviously, is another policy that you can, again, use to, obviously, again, to try and make it more attractive to go at different times. That's an age-old thing. It doesn't seem to have much effect, does it? One just goes at the sort of busy time and pays it and moans about it. But, that is a policy that you can apply. Plus, I think a general sort of awareness raising that that we all have a part to play in the community being welcoming of visitors is very dependent upon them not being crowded out by the visitors. And, that makes sense if you read about it or hear about it, you can understand that. So it's a kind of educating the tourists and educating the communities to see that there's a balance that's got to be struck there between them. So bringing communities into determining the tourism policies that happen in their area, that's rather important, sort of community buy-in, and of course sustainability. So again, that's a policy which has to be worked through with transport in particular, so that you don't have everybody whizzing up Snowdon and parking in the same place at the same time, etc., etc. And I think people haven't thought about these things. People have had their disposable incomes perhaps, and they whiz off to do things without necessarily thinking about their impact. So it is something that has to be played back to tourists themselves.
Yeah, I suppose when making policies, there is a level of responsibility. There is a burden on the screen tourists themselves. It's not just the policymakers. There needs to be examples of responsibility, I suppose, and in spending money on these places, because after all, the screen tourists are the ones that keep screen tourism alive. Martin, what are your thoughts on these issues created by screen tourism, such as inflated property prices in a filming location?
Yeah, definitely. I don't think it could be said.
Or the strain on public services.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at economic success on the basis of visitor spend and number of tourists, then even the obvious examples of too much publicity, such as Game of Thrones in Dubrovnik, for example, you can't say that tourism's gone down, and you've got to say, well, in terms of tourism terms, its economic effect is very strong. But yeah, I think that there are negative effects. Which were the two that you mentioned again?
It was the inflated property prices in a filming location and increased pressure on the public services in that area. How important are these things?
Yeah, definitely both. I think public services, there's a definite strain at that pinch point of, an Instagrammable location because it was seen on some Bollywood film, and it's in Switzerland. It's called Hallstatt, I think, in Switzerland. And, suddenly the effect on the residents is terrible. It really is, because there's one location that's the obvious one that, was in the screen, in the film. And everyone wants their photos taken. So social media has come in on top. And whilst it's been beneficial to screen tourism, it's also created this extra flow of information and publicity for certain pinch points. As I say, Game of Thrones in Dubrovnik is another one. I think overall, the residents suffer more than the businesses, and supply and demand means that more businesses will come in if there's more tourists in the first place. I think more and more destinations are waking up to the fact that they've got to, visitor marketing is one thing, visitor management is another, and they've got to manage the visitors and carefully. And we see this with National Trust properties the day after or the week after they've been featured on TV, where they'll suddenly get an influx of too many members and members of National Trust and not enough paying customers because there's too many people arriving on the property at the same time.
Absolutely. The local councils and authorities need to address and to realise this, that when there is going to be a film or famous filming location open up, that there will be an increase in these issues, increase in footfall, which opens the gates to these issues of overcrowding, increased pricing, and it needs to be a core consideration. So, Dame Judith, on the topic of these major productions, if the UK had not hosted these globally recognised productions, how different do you think the current tourism landscape now would look?
I think it's kind of, you have to get it into perspective as well, that sort of people, it's possible, I suppose, people won't have seen these productions. Sort of they seem very household names to, I think, isn't Peaky Blinders the most watched television program globally or something? It's got some amazing sobriquet, of that sort. So clearly, a lot of people are aware of these programs, even if they haven't watched them sort of every episode. And therefore they are they can be influential because, as I said, and we've been saying all along, greater attention has been being paid to them and the places where they happened that people can go and visit. But people also go for, wonderful scenery, wonderful historical legacy, wonderful opportunities to experience extraordinary local delicacies, and people go on gourmet trips and so on. So, one shouldn't overplay it as being the only reason why people travel. I think it's just probably a symptom of our intense focus on, as it were, sort of the images and entertainment and accessibility to that entertainment, and therefore accessibility also perhaps to the places where they were made, that is very important. So I think, yes, I think all of those have been rather important for Britain's soft power, and I think by dint of being important for our soft power, and more recently through the application of sort of joining the dots on these things, I think they probably are very important, and the fact that they are made here is important. I think the fact that Paddington, also the musical, scooped up all the Olivier Awards last night.
Yes, I did see that.
Again, there'll be quite a market overseas, sort of interested in Paddington and sort of just chasing that through and seeing that it's got a very innovative stage production now. And they may well think, right, we'll go and see that. Let's hope we can get Paddington out of London. Otherwise, it's going to be only a gain for London. But yeah, sort of, Warhorse, for example.
Yes, I love Warhorse.
Huge. I don't think with Warhorse, because obviously it was a stage production first of all, although it became a film. I don't think people have particularly identified that with any place, and therefore it's not. But it's sort of it's travelling around the world, makes people think about Britain and about Britain's stage and Britain's theatre, and let's go and see a production of Warhorse if we're in London, as well as The Mousetrap,
Yeah, it's sort of like a cause and effect. These productions get filmed here, and then it opens the gates to, theatre productions, more opportunities to express British values, British culture, and Paddington is the textbook example of that, I think. Martin, coming back to you then, as the organizer of SetJet 25, I want to hear really from an organizer's perspective, what are destinations getting wrong when they try to replicate the success of a place that's been boosted by a global hit?
I think, I'm not sure a lot of them do copy because they haven't necessarily. I mean, screen tourism comes from a film or TV series or a game being filmed in that area. So if, Coventry can't really do much to sort of copy the Peaky Blinders success in Birmingham. And I mean, some will go then to other filming companies and will say, look, we're an alternative destination. You see this internationally with Vancouver doubling for San Francisco or Toronto doubling for New York in film. So definitely destinations look at each other's success. But I think generally, once a destination has become synonymous with a film, then I don't. There may be, it's never been, to my knowledge, it's not been studied properly. I mean, there's a film called Crazy Rich Asians, I don't know if you've seen it, which was filmed in Singapore. Yeah, I can see people, places like Seoul, Kuala Lumpur, trying to do something along those lines. My Big Fat Greek Wedding, I can see Malta, trying to do something and saying, well, we should be getting our share of the weddings market. But I don't see too many examples of that, actually.
Okay, that's interesting.
And so, what are they getting wrong? I think one thing that they would get wrong is if they copied, if they used brand IP, intellectual property, without the say-so. One of the biggest issues for any destination or attraction in screen tourism is actually getting permission to use the sort of publicity stills and video that they really would like to use. And it's only those destinations that work very closely and very well with producers that actually get that. So again, I can't see other destinations. I mean, in the tourism attractions world, you have one or two places like Alnwick Castle up in Northumberland that can actually, probably say they can probably actually use the Harry Potter motif and or logo, or
Yeah, it's sort of exclusive.
but others will put on what they call a wizard weekend, and so they can't use the words Harry Potter. So I think that there's
okay.
a lot of destinations who don't really try and copy too much.
I suppose it's about preserving the authenticity of a certain filming location, which is quite important, to be fair. So, Judith, on the Screen Tourism Council, how did you balance the promotion of the screen-linked destinations with preserving cultural authenticity and preventing places from becoming overly commercialised?
I think, you can do that because by, for example, drawing people in because of Peaky Blinders sort of thing. But then, when you're in Birmingham, I mean, it's a fabulous city with all sorts of amazing, had a complete makeover, as you probably know, and it's sort of,
yeah, it has
tremendously lively sort of places to go and to eat and to walk and so on and so forth. So you can, as it were, present your contemporary culture and stuff that people don't know about the place, because people have been drawn in by the other things. And that's then the skill in which you weave your sort of advertisement about your place, is to sort of, bring people in because of the Peaky Blinders, which of course in itself is quite an interesting sort of concept. I mean, sort of not just the violence and the sort of the glamour of it all, but also the sort of First World War backdrop and the sort of unemployment, and and so the urban tale can be very important there. And I suppose, sort of thinking of Bishop Auckland and this Kinren thing, once you go there, there are amazing galleries, and the Jonathan Reffer, the man who sort of donated millions to it, has done lots of things to improve the city and to basically make culture much more available. And has a museum of faith, which is an extraordinary place. So, get people there and you can show them other things. It doesn't have to be just all centered around screen tourism.
It's like they go to these places and they find out it's not just a filming location. There's so much more there to explore, to discover, to learn.
It's not the only thing. Yeah.
So, Martin, on this authenticity, then, how does screen tourism interact with the existing cultural identity of a location? Is there a danger of locations becoming backdrops rather than lived-in communities?
I think the second part of that question, is there a danger of I think there is a danger of the communities suffering, and you mentioned inflated property prices, and yes, definitely it's one factor that will lead to inflated property prices, is the sort of popularity on the screen. But I think culturally, for me, screen tourism I've come at it from the tourism point of view, but there's this word, have you come across the word soft power?
Yes, I have. I have heard of it. Can we get a definition for our listeners?
Soft power is sort of, the effect of, has Britain got strong soft power overseas? Yes, it has, because people love our pop music and people love our royal family, and it's not, you don't have to spend loads on advertising the royal family. They're just there, and people, a lot of people love them. Some don't. So I think screen tourism, and it's basically what you've seen on screen. So it is it is tied up with the culture, and some are tied up more with the culture than others, and some are negatively tied up with the culture. Like there's a program on TV called Silent Witness, which is all about post-mortems and things, but it's a detective series effectively, and they've relocated from London to Birmingham, so it's being shot in Birmingham, and it's quite negative. It's all about, what you see is Birmingham, the rough side of Birmingham. And so this cultural thing, there was something on TV last week in Silent Witness where, millions of people, 2 or 3 million probably, will have seen race wars, gang wars in Birmingham. And so culturally, they might have had a view of Birmingham like that. I don't know. And it's just reinforced it, or they might not have had a view of Birmingham, and it's created that view. So I think that there's a danger of, because it's wrapped up in the culture, it's not necessarily a good thing. It can be, and some of Cold Feet was a very popular series about 20 years ago, and it was set in Manchester, and a bit like Friends in New York. It was groups of 20-somethings living, and it definitely helped Manchester get more city breaks from 20-something people, because it was just very positive. And that, helped the cultural identity of Manchester. So, and the Brit Awards this week, that's reinforcing the slightly edgy but popular and young side of vibrant side of Manchester. So, I think these things really do help. So culture, yeah, in a way, culture's very important, and you'll often see destinations coming at screen tourism from a cultural angle and not just a tourism impact and a tourism visitor economy angle.
Birmingham is an excellent example of that, yeah, with the Peaky Blinders, and my visit to the Black Country Living Museum was phenomenal. It was incredible, and it more emphasized, though I feel like there's a bigger emphasis on displaying the culture of the place rather than just aiming to rake in as many screen tourists as possible with an over exaggeration on Peaky Blinders. Peaky Blinders was filmed there. It's a big part of the Black Country Living Museum, but it's not the main aspect. The main aspect is the culture. It's the everything surrounding Peaky Blinders. That's what motivates screen tourists, I think, is not just the series, but what the series is about, like the deeper meaning. 100%. So we've reached the end, and I have one more question, and this one goes to both of you. Looking ahead, do you see screen tourism becoming a central pillar of UK tourism policy, or should it remain a complementary asset alongside heritage, culture, and natural tourism? Judith, do you want to take this one first?
Oh, I think it will remain complementary. I mean, I think it's sexy and it's blockbusterish, isn't it? In the sense that, I mean, some people like legacy, some people like nature, but most people like films and series and television and things, the majority. So, it has that kind of mass appeal, and probably a classless appeal in some ways too. People don't just watch television series from one background. They may hear about it from their mates and friends, but and that may limit it or expand it. But it isn't something which, it probably isn't quite as segregating as some other things. So I think that it'll remain really important. But I think it's a portal to other things too. I mean, if you go to one of these places, I mean, good old Yorkshire, and you sort of do this, but standing on those moors or whatever, how could you not be impressed by wanting to go on a tour of them, or going to the Bronte House, or and then going on to York and sort of, I mean, these things are complementary to each other, and I think there'll be no attempt to just kind of ditch everything else and say, okay, let's do screen tourism.
Thanks, Judith. Martin?
I think, again, for some destinations, it will become a core pillar, and where the positive destinations in that respect are ones where they tie up culture and tourism, and they can actually come at it from a screen commission point of view, get more filming. Screen tourism point of view is market the filming you've got. So I think that for some, it will be a core pillar. It will rarely be one of the top 5 sort of important factors. I mean, we struggle to get tourism as a top 5 industry sector within local authority within local authority priorities. So in those areas where screen tourism has had a positive effect, I don't think it will be forgotten. I think it will always be something that's thereabouts. And I think there is a huge recognition now of the power of the film industry and the TV industry, the games sector, which has come on more leaps and bounds. So a lot of destinations. It was just last night that Doncaster announced filming studios being created there, and there's some really interesting film studios side of things. So yeah, I think it's going to be an important part of an economic development strategy for some destinations. For others, it's not. It'll just get a byline in a strategy.
It's not very consistent. I suppose there are so many different factors to consider in policy making and determining whether screen tourism is an added bonus or whether it should be or could be relied upon. These factors being the geography of the location, the reception of people living there, as we've talked about throughout this podcast episode, So yeah, there's plenty more to be done, but I still feel like it's just not a priority for the government, for local councils, and I think it's an untapped goldmine. It really is. It's sitting on an untapped goldmine with the potential for screen tourism, 100%. And that brings us to the end of this episode, and sadly the series. Dame Judith and Mr. Evans, thank you so much for joining me and for sharing your insights on the bigger picture of screen tourism. And thank you to everyone who's listened throughout the Scenestalking podcast. This project has explored how stories on screen translate into real-world impact, and hopefully it's shown just how powerful that connection can be at the moment and for generations to come. If you've missed any episodes, make sure to recap via my major research project. And finally, thank you again for tuning in. We couldn't have done this without you, our passionate audience of screen lovers. This is Bruno Casey, signing off.